So that time has come and you're finally 3 to 4 years in college, or you're even about to graduate, and you've got your transcript in your hands and you look down and you're thinking, wow, that can't be my GPA. I mean, it's too low. But then you look at the top and it has your name on it. So obviously it's yours. And then that's when you start to think, maybe I should have done little bit better in English 101, or maybe I should have done a little bit better in anatomy. But at this point, there's only so many things you can do. But with that being said though, you can still get into physical therapy school despite having a low GPA. This may not seem too low of a GPA for you, but for me, just to give you a start off of where my GPA was in terms of when I applied to PT school, my GPA was just at a 3.3, and that equates to just about a B average. But here I am now, 3 years later still, and I still got into PT school and I'm doing just fine. So I hope that schools just don't solely look at your GPA when you're applying. If you've ever seen that movie Pursuit of Happyness, and the part where he walks into the interview and then the interviewer goes, what would you say to a guy who walked into an interview without a shirt on? And then Will Smith, he replies,
"He must have had on some really nice pants."
And then when I think of that scenario, I think about how there's other aspects of your application when applying to PT school that you can manipulate and make better, so that it kind of like, not in a way masks, but it does make you seem like a reasonable candidate to be chosen as to why they should accept you into their school. So here are my 5 tips how you can get into PT school despite a low GPA. 4 of them are pretty straightforward and I'm pretty sure you're already doing, but the 5th one is something that I found out really in particular helped myself, so I'd like to share it with you. Tip number 1 is regarding your essays. When I was writing my essay, I made sure that they were personal, meaningful, and relatable to whomever would be reading it. If you're gonna write an essay, just make sure not to include, one of the reasons why I want to become a physical therapist is because of the money. Obviously, something in your life, such as be a family event or whether or not another physical therapist has treated you and inspired you to become one of them. Maybe while playing sports, you injured yourself and you were at rehab for a while. Something like that is often appropriate to include in your essays that a lot of admission counselors would like. Tip number 2 is to do well in your GREs. I can't stress enough how I feel like the GREs are a point where you can really shine among others. But it goes back to, you gotta study for it, you gotta do really well for it. And when I was taking the GREs, I made sure to buy a test prep book and adequately allot my time, since I was still in college, to study a bit every day just to do well in the GREs. And even after doing that though, I wouldn't say that my GRE scores weren't exactly the best, but they were adequate enough to get me to where I am now. My GRE scores were pretty average, with probably just about the math portion being the high score. Tip number 3 is regarding your volunteer hours. When I was first getting to know my classmates, one of the questions that we'd ask each other is, how many volunteer hours were you able to accumulate before you applied? And then it stuck out to me that I felt like there was a difference between someone who had over 1,000 volunteer paid hours versus someone who had 250 volunteer hours. You could interpret it as one being more motivated, that they were typically just going to work basically, and that was considered their volunteer hours. But in my case, I had around 280 volunteer hours, and I feel like that for admission counselors, that showed them that I was going out of my way and willing to spend my time to see what an actual physical therapist does to help people. It'll really stick out to admission counselors when they know that this guy or girl wasn't just motivated by payment as to why they had this many hours. Tip number 4 is related to your interviews. If you get an interview to a school, you can definitely interpret that as, this school is actually considering me to be part of their physical therapy program. So with that opportunity given to you, you have to really make sure that you nail that interview. Know what you're gonna say when you get into the interview, control it. The point of the interview isn't simply to just be, they ask a question and you answer. It's gonna be, they ask you a question and you answer and you control the interview. You include things that you were planning to say and you make them related to that question. Although I did interview at some schools, I was sure that I did really, really well in them. I felt that I was confident, I felt that I controlled the interview, and I was just ecstatic coming out of the room after the interview. But sadly, those schools that I did interview at, I still was not accepted. But make sure when you come out of an interview and still get rejected, you have to be confident enough to know that, the reason why I was rejected from the school wasn't because of their interview, it was other parts of my application. Last but not least, tip number 5. Tip number 5 that I can give to you that I'm confidently sure that helped me get into the school where I am today was to follow up with letters that you receive. And what I mean by this is that after I received a lot of rejection letters from the schools that I've already interviewed at, I did the extra mile, which I think differed me from other students, and that was to follow up with waitlisted letters. And what I mean by that was, as soon as I would receive a waitlisted letter, I would go ahead and reply to them back and tell them, you know, thank you for the opportunity that was given to me. I'm really glad to be on the wait list. If you have any questions regarding my application or just have any other general questions at all, feel free to contact me and I'd be happy to reply. And I feel like following up with those waitlisted letters that I would receive really stuck me out from other applicants. It showed that I was proactive in terms of, you know, I really do want to go into your school, so I really am going to take the time to thank you for sending me the wait list. And it showed that I wasn't seeing the wait list as a negative opportunity, but rather I was seeing it as a positive opportunity and I was thanking them for it. And then I don't mean to say that every week you're going to follow up with the admissions counselor and say, hey, what spot am I? Or hey, did I get accepted? That's not exactly what I did. As soon as I received the waitlisted letter, I went ahead and replied. And then if they ever emailed me again, I replied again, and it was just all with positive attitude, a grateful attitude. And I think that really stuck out to the admissions counselor of the school where I am today, that, you know, this guy really does want to be a physical therapist, you know, let's accept him. And then after all that, if it all comes down to it, you know you did well in your interviews, you know you did well in your GREs, your essays were sincere and they were personal, and you were following up with not just the waitlisted letters that you received, but all the letters that you received. Ultimately, you may just have to retake classes. But as I said, related to getting waitlisted, try and see retaking classes with a positive attitude. From my point of view, I tried and refrained from reverting to having to retake classes, but I could see some positives out of it. And what I mean by this is because during my first year of PT school, there was definitely a lot of material that I learned in undergraduate school that was being taught and retested on again in physical therapy school in my first year. So if you do have to retake some classes, go ahead and see that as a positive, in terms that at least when you do get into PT school, the information will be fresh in your mind for the material that they do teach you in your first year. Some classes that I think would benefit me if I had to retake them, if I didn't get in my first try, would be anatomy, kinesiology, some sports related classes, some upper extremity and lower extremity classes, definitely exercise physiology. So even if I had to retake those because I got a low grade in them, at least that information would still be fresh in my mind for when I do get into PT school. And with that being said, thanks for watching, guys. If you haven't already, please give this video a thumbs up, like it, comment below, and do subscribe. Ask any questions in the comment sections, and perhaps I'll even make a video of it answering your question. See you next time.